also this movie called The Last Black Man in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the magic of that city is just so palpable and so beautiful. And there was a scene where they were in some place with a lot of books, and it felt right. It felt like books belonged there, of all places there, because it's so it feels so ancient and magical and mystical. So I can't wait.
Definitely has that vibe. Welcome as people are filing in. Welcome. We're going to be starting in a little bit, so grab yourself a beverage, get cozy, grab a blanket. You're in for a real treat. So excited. There's also like great food, so you can have great food and books. What else do you need? And coffee.
Well, also, I'm just sitting here getting jealous because we're in New York, and being outside right now is a very important thing. So, like, to see a friend, you put on a mask, you put on basically a sleeping bag that's a jacket, and you go stand on a corner. Whereas, like, there, I'm sure it's still rather lovely. I'm just sad that we're not there.
Yeah.
It's coming soon. It's coming soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Come on in. Isaac, I read your article about the 20,000 steps that you are committed to. How is that going? Are you still keeping that charge?
I am, but again, super cold.
Yeah.
It is.
Although it hasn't been there's only been like one pretty tough snow, so I've actually gotten pretty lucky. After that article got published, because I mentioned that I was doing it in bands, I got about 200 emails telling me to get proper shoe wear. So I did that, and that's helped.
That's good.
Oh, well, that's great.
Have some better arch support. Not that fans don't, but steps a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to Book Passage. Our little store, Marin, has been prides itself on bringing together authors and readers since 1976. That's 44 years. So this is what we do. This is what we love. My name is Julie Carlucci, and I head up the Sign First Editions Club for Book Passage. A special shout out to all of our club members from around the world. Welcome. I am so honored tonight to be hosting our January author, Robert Jones Jr., whose book is already receiving off the charts praise for his debut, The Prophet. Amazing, amazing. Robert has been frequently mentioned alongside with Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. And once you begin to savor the prose of this masterpiece, you will quickly understand why his lyricism is on par with these literary giants.
Oh, goodness.
The Prophets, I got chills. The Prophets is a story about queerness in the antebellum South. It encompasses a wide span of history told from an ensemble of characters from the African world that the enslaved are descendants from, a world that I love how you painted, a world truly free from the human constructs of race and gender norms, and the new world of the antebellum South. And what really struck me about this book is the skilled writing that allows us to dive so deep into the hearts and minds of each character, such that we as a reader can see their soul. We are able to see them beyond their human bodies and are incredibly moved and uplifted by their spirit and humanity. And when I read it, I'm reminded, again, love is the most supreme and powerful force in our universe and will ultimately prevail in even the most inhumane and unspeakable circumstances. Robert Jones Jr. was born and raised in New York City, received his MFA with honors from Brooklands College, and is founder of the Son of Baldwin blog site, which with the aim of leading and participating in conversations that shed light on matters from a Black queer perspective. In conversation with Robert Jones Jr. tonight is Isaac Fitzgerald, who is a firefighter, boat worker, knighted by a king. That's basically given a sword by a king, knighted by a king. He's also a best-selling children's author, How to Be a Pirate, currently working on his YA novel, an essay collection, Dirtbag, Massachusetts, and a frequent collaborator to the New York Times and The Guardian. Welcome, both of you. and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna clap. I get it. It's weird. It's these events, they're always so quiet. So if you're in a house and you can clap, feel free to clap. Robert, you wanted to start by reading a section of the book, correct?
I did. I am reading from somewhere in the middle where Samuel and Isaiah, the two main characters of the book, are made aware of some troubling news. And this is sort of how they're responding to that troubling news. I don't want to spoil it and say what that news is, but here we go. Isaiah took a deep breath and held it. He let it out. Then, because what else could he do, he shrugged. Silently, grief shook his body. Don't, Samuel said, standing still in the same spot, holding the cloth in his left hand. Don't what? Cry or shrug? Isaiah didn't know, and he was too tired to ask, but he did think about the ways in which his body wasn't his own, and how that condition showed up uniquely for everyone whose personhood wasn't just disputed, but denied. Swirling beneath him were the ways in which not having lawful claim to yourself diminished you, yes, but in another way, condemned those who invented the disconnection. He hoped. But maybe not in this realm, but absolutely in others, if there were others. Matching hard for hard did nothing but create wreckage, but being soft, while beautiful, was subject to being torn asunder by the harder thing. What other answer was there then, but to be some kind of flexible, stretch further, so that there was too much difficulty in trying to pull you apart? Samuel was a hard thing. There was no use in trying to make him anything other than that. And he had every right, even if sometimes he didn't understand how his rigidity, that impenetrable door that Pua perhaps was the first one to notice, was built up in the wrong direction. But some people thought hard was the answer and believed that rather than bend, you had to try to snap them in half because they were confident that you couldn't. Isaiah, however, knew of the sporadic but attendant softness inside Samuel. Ground cover rocky, yes, but soil giving. And Samuel only half trusted him with that knowledge, preferred actually if Isaiah didn't know it at all. So some things he kept to himself. The shadow with the pointing hand would be one of them. It was in the barn, he could admit that, but it wasn't in the woods or riding Maggie's back like a strapped babe. A mutual sigh released them from having to continue the argument. No one had to willingly relent or gloat over a victory. The inhalation, then exhalation of breath provided enough room for both of them to hold on to a little bit of dignity, even in the middle of desecration. Samuel looked down at the bundle in his hand. He looked up and motioned with his head for Isaiah to follow him as he walked around to the back of the barn. Isaiah walked behind him, tracing Samuel's steps, walking in them sometimes and sometimes making his own path through the chicory and spurge. When they came to the rear of the barn, where the sun was bright with anger and the knothole that betrayed them was a kind of memorial, Samuel stopped. Isaiah walked a bit farther to where there was a little bit of shade because a yellow pine, not 30 years old yet, was in the process of spreading itself there, and he found its scent reassuring because of the way it hid his own. He turned to look at Samuel, moving against his nature because there was the possibility of an accusatory shadow. He walked over to where Isaiah was and sat down at the base of the tree. Isaiah sat down next to him. Samuel flattened his lap and unfastened Maggie's cloth. And what did they have here? A veritable feast of boiled eggs, fried ham, blackberry jelly on thick slices of bread, 2 whole nectarines, and a big old chunk of brown cake. Mercy, Isaiah said. Samuel didn't want to remember the shadow he didn't see. He picked up a nectarine and gestured for Isaiah to take one for himself. Almost at the same time, they bit into them. The juices ran down their faces. Isaiah wiped the juice away, but Samuel didn't. He stared ahead at the rear of the barn. Neither of them spoke. but they each continued to eat, picking things from the cloth slowly, carefully, one with grateful hands, the other with discerning ones, like ritual, but without prayer, because they didn't need one, and respect was freely given. But still, it was solemn like, holy, as onto a last supper. Thank you, Isaac.
I like to imagine everybody is clapping that's watching this. Everybody's just clapping. Well done. Speaking of news, very good news though in this case. I want to start by congratulating you. Firstly, there's basically two bits of really exciting news for you. One is that Dinesh Smith, their review of your novel is going to be on the cover of the New York Times Book Review. And number two, which you found out today, is that your book is debuting, your debut novel is debuting on the New York Times bestsellers list. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to propose a toast to all of the readers who bought this book, to Putnam and to Janklow and Nesbitt for their support, and just everyone who ever supported me ever in life. Thank you. This is for you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, so deserved. But I want to actually sit in this moment for a second, because this is, it's so hard won, so deserved. How do you feel right now?
I feel in a state of disbelief. This moment has been a dream for so long, but a dream that I never allowed myself to embrace for fear of not ever realizing it. And then the fact that it's now happening, it just feels surreal. It doesn't feel, it feels like it's happening to someone else named Robert Jones Jr. And that I'm watching it happening, and I'm very happy for that Robert Jones Jr., but I'm a spectator. But I also feel a tremendous sense of gratitude, that the many years of hard work, the people surrounding me, supporting me, this seems like a wonderful way, or a wonderful thank you to all that went into this, this work, the book, and this moment is just unbelievable. And I'm grateful.
Well, yeah, believe it. And I that was, I mean, it's so beautiful and so wonderful. And I saw the news right before we got started. So it was an exciting place to be able to start. But let's talk about why so many people are so clearly connecting with your novel. I want to start with the characters. Samuel and Isaiah are so, like, the word that just comes to mind is beautiful. Their love, but also their full realization as three-dimensional humans on the page, as it were. How did you dream them up? And how did you get a kind of a different feel for their complex personalities? Did the book start with these two characters?
The book started with Samuel. And Samuel came to me in the oddest of ways. It was my first semester of grad school, and my fiction tutorial instructor, Stacy Derasmo, shout out to Stacy, gave us an assignment where we had to go out into the real world and find objects that a character in a novel that we were thinking about, or a story, or a character that we wanted to bring to life would possess. And I found in Brooklyn, in the trash, on by the curb, a pair of shackles. And goodness knows what the story behind that is. But when I lifted them, I felt sort of the weight of them and knew immediately that this character was enslaved. And I already knew that I wanted to write about a Black queer character, but wasn't really certain that I could write about a Black queer character in a period where enslavement was still flourishing. But Toni Morrison said, if you can't find the book you wish to read, then you must write it. So I said, okay, I'm going to tackle this, even though I can't find anything in the canon that provides a sort of template. Because of all the books I read, and I was a Africana Studies minor in undergrad, none of Blackness and queerness, or the Black queer figure, doesn't show up in literature until about the Harlem Renaissance, when Wallace Thurman starts writing. And they are nearly nowhere to be seen prior to that. And that was very curious to me. And then when the idea of Blackness and queerness is even broached earlier than the Harlem Renaissance, what you get is incidents of sexual assault. And my question was, what about love?
Mm.
And from that moment, I started writing Samuel, sketching him out. What did he like? What did he dislike? What did he look like? What did he smell like? What was his favorite foods? All of these sorts of things. And initially, the Prophets was called the Book of Samuel, and I was going to tell the entire story from his point of view. But I ran into issues because there were things that I wanted to discuss that Samuel, his perspective was too limited. I couldn't talk about those things. So I said, well, maybe Samuel needs a partner, an equal, someone who he loves. And Isaiah was born, and his initial, their names initially were Simon and Hannibal. Um, and I said, oh, all right, I'll tell the story from both of their points of view, and it'll give me a fuller picture. And that still wasn't enough. And I said, I know what the problem is. The story is about their love, and it's not about them individually. Maybe it's about their love and how that love affects other people. So I need the other people to participate in this. And that's how all the other people came. And trying to figure out that structure in a way that felt cohesive, I started reading Toni Morrison's Paradise and Ayanna Mathis's The 12 Tribes of Hattie to kind of get that polyphonic perspective down. And once it felt cohesive, with the help of my editor, Sally Kim, and my agent, PJ Mark, then I said, okay, this might be something. I might be able to get somewhere with this.
And so, and that is when you made that jump to kind of, like you said, it's how the love affects so many different people around them, at Empty, at the plantation, but also because you basically are telling chapters from different perspectives from so many different characters. And I have to say it, not a single one of them flat. Again, all of these characters kind of shining. So just personal curiosity, as I was reading through the book, I wanted to ask, did you have a favorite character? Yeah. And how did that change while you were writing it?
Well, initially, my favorite character was Isaiah, because I just loved his gentility and his unabashed, unashamed love for Samuel. It was something very aspirational to me. But then King Akusa started to intrigue me a bit more because, okay, after I'm done with the book, I want to know so much more about her. Someone had asked in a previous conversation if I ever thought about writing a sequel or a prequel or something to the Prophets, and my answer is no. But if I was going to, it was probably going to kind of go back to King Akusa to find out much more about her life, because we kind of meet her at the end, and not, we don't know what made her her. But she just intrigues me in so many ways because she helped me to understand different ways of thinking about gender and sexuality and kingship and community. And she's just a fascinating character to me. And she's one of the first characters who talked to me, who I felt like was actually in control. Like I was just writing down what she told me to write. So that was she's currently my favorite.
One of those moments where it really did flow through you a bit. I do, because I want to stay away from spoilers. We want everyone in the audience that is watching us here tonight, if you've not read this fantastic novel, you should absolutely buy a copy from Book Passage. And also, just real quick, if you want to ask a question during this event, if you have a Twitch account, you can do so. You can log in, you can leave a question, and it will get to me, I promise. But I just, a little bit more about that character. Again, no spoilers, but I mean, this novel is so many things. It's a literary epic. It's a love story. It is historical fiction, and it's like you got historical fiction on your historical fiction, without giving too much away. Why that decision to go even further back, especially when addressing sexuality and gender?
That's a great question, because initially the chapters that go back to pre-colonial Africa did not exist. How they came to me was because of how the ancestral voice, which also takes a role in this book, came to me, which was in a dream. I woke up in the middle of the night one night, heard a voice in the dream, scribbled down what they said blindly because I didn't really understand what they were saying. It was in the dark. I was half asleep. Didn't remember when I woke up what it was I scribbled down, but came to my computer to enter it into the manuscript and saw that it said, "You do not yet know us." And I said, what? This sounds like a direct address. How do I, who says this? Is this the ancestors? Do they get to have a voice in this directly to the reader, to me, to the other characters? I said, okay, I'll give them their piece. And then as I'm writing their chapters, another statement was made that made me think. They said, this is not the beginning, but this is where we shall begin. And I said, well, where shall we begin? And it seemed like they were pulling me back across the ocean to kind of look at what was happening before enslavement, because so often slavery becomes the defining moment for the African American, in which the slavery itself almost becomes more important than us as people.
Mm.
And so I wanted to go back, as I was being pulled across the ocean, to the time when slavery was not part of the definition of who we were as Black people. And this also came up in my research, how many pre-colonial African societies had very different ideas about gender and sexuality than what we understand, how we understand them in the West. For example, there's a artist activist, absolutely brilliant. Her name is Esther Arma, and she's from Ghana. And she said, if you asked my grandparents what a homosexual was, they would say, I have no idea what you mean. What is that? Because in her tribes, there was no need to give that a separate name. It was just considered love. If two men loved each other, two women loved each other, it was fine. It was all love. She says her exact metaphor was, gender and sexuality was like the land. There were no boundaries. And it wasn't until colonial intervention and Christian missionary work that Africans began to look at their own traditions as evil, their own cultures, their own way of being is wrong, as sinful. And so I wanted to go back to a time before so that I could contrast it with what Samuel and Isaiah were experiencing in antebellum Mississippi, so that we could see what the impetus for this anti-queerness, as well as the racism, actually comes in with the so-called civilizing society of Europe. And that is how the African voices came in. I was led to them by the ancestors.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful answer. And I'm so impressed on so many different levels. But one of them is, that might be the first time I've heard somebody say, I wrote down what I dreamed. And it actually led to, like, I think I understand what this is, and I'm able to put this on the page. And it became such an important part, because there's the opening, of course, as well, and throughout. But I wanted to ask, you touched on it there for a moment. The decision to set this in Mississippi on a plantation, because it is so much about love, this story, right? But it is also so much about restriction.
Mm.
And I was just wondering, was that something you started this novel, I believe, 14 years ago?
Yes.
Is that, did you always know this was the setting for these characters? Did you, the plantation, also called Empty, did you know that's where you wanted it to be, and did you stick with that over that time period?
I initially knew that it was going to be in the South, obviously, because slavery was most prevalent in the South. Not that it didn't exist in the North, because it did, which is a big misconception, but it was most prevalent in the South. So I was certain of the South. I think at first I thought maybe South Carolina, because part of my maternal lineage is South Carolinian.
Mhm.
But then, as an homage to a great actress and a great activist named Bea Richards, who was from Vicksburg, Mississippi, I decided I wanted to set it there. And then there were other reasons that I wanted to set it in Mississippi. One, Mississippi is one of the greatest sites of anti-Blackness in this country. It is also one of the greatest sites of Black resistance in this country. And I wanted to pay tribute to that. And so I started doing all this research on Mississippi, um, talking to my family members who lived and worked there, and really started to coalesce around the idea that Mississippi was the right setting, because I began to see pictures of it in my head. So initially, I was just certain that it would be the South, but Mississippi sort of revealed itself to me as the proper place for it to be.
Mm. And to kind of drill down and to be even more specific, one of the centers of the, and there are so many centers, but just the barn. Can you explain maybe to the audience kind of the importance of the barn, and just curiosity as a writer, why is that where you decided to place these two characters who are so in love?
There was something about, well, I'm going to answer that last question first about why I wanted to put them in the barn. I needed a space where they could be separate from the rest of the enslaved, alone together,
Mm.
and doing work that was grueling, but still in a way nurturing, because they were taking care of animals and such.
Mm, mm,
And farm work or barn work made a fit all of those things. It helped me to find all of those things. But as I started writing, the barn began to become a character of its own in a way, in that it became a refuge, a disguise, a holy place for Samuel and Isaiah, and even for people who went inside. They had these weird experiences when seeing Samuel and Isaiah in that space. Um, and that sort of came out organically as I was writing about them and their lovemaking and their arguments and their playing in that space. It began to come to life as, well, this is perfect, because Massa thinks they're working, and they are, but they could sort of, in a way, use that work as a cover for all the other things they're able to do. Because all he sees is they're really good at taking care of the horses, and they're big black bucks. Shout out to Mateo Ascarapor. Um, that it just seemed natural that it would be their safe space.
mm. It was absolutely beautiful. As we're, and it's, I'm glad you said the barn almost as a character, because I feel like in a way we are still kind of talking about characters. So before we move on, one last decision, like we were talking about briefly earlier, you have so many different character perspectives in this novel, and both white and black. When in your process did you decide that you were also going to tell this story from the perspective of the slavers? And also, something that you did very deftly was whiteness never felt centered, yet you still got into these characters. Was that something you were trying to be very diligent about?
Initially, I did not want to include any white characters. I wanted to just include Black characters and tell this only from the point of view of Black characters. But then I realized that the burden of slavery was not the Black characters. The burden of slavery is on the slaver. That is his or her moral failing. So it was important for me to understand why a human being would treat another human being this way. It was also important for me to position the white characters as responsible for this entire situation. Um, they had to be implicated in a way. They had to be present in order to be implicated. Um, because the danger, I thought, in leaving them out would be to say that slavery was only the purview of Black people, when it was something that it wasn't us, it was something that was done to us. And this is who it was done to us by. I hear some people say, the villain of this story is Amos. And that's really interesting to me that people interpret it that way, because to me, the villain of this story is Paul, because Paul does all of the things that forces Amos to have to do the things that he does. So it's interesting that maybe Amos is a little bit more hands-on in his opposition to Samuel and Isaiah, but the wizard of Oz, who is doing all the stuff, is Paul. So to me, he is the villain of the book. And if I had left Paul out, Amos would have definitely looked like the central or the main villain. But to me, I think it is actually Paul.
Mm-hmm. And that led to its conflicts. And I think you're absolutely right there too. For those in the audience who maybe haven't read the book, could you just tell us a little bit about Amos, just so that they have context for what you just said? But that is absolutely true.
Absolutely. Amos is another enslaved, sort of elder man on the plantation who, in a bid to protect someone he loves very dearly, makes a deal with Paul to do some things to Samuel and Isaiah that Paul wants done. And it's a conflict for Amos, because Amos loves Samuel and Isaiah. He loves them, but he also loves this other person, and it's kind of a Sophie's choice for him, where he's like, either you do what I say, or this is going to happen, because there's someone I have to protect. And yes, it's horrible that I have to do this to you, but I have no other choice if I want to save this person. It's tragic, but also enraging, and also sad, that Amos has to do that. And Paul, of course, is the plantation owner. He's the one who inherits empty from his father, and is a stern taskmaster on that land.
Mm-hmm. When did Amos come to you? When in the writing process did you realize that the protagonist, for lack of a better, we're going to go up basically against, let's just call it just kind of a spread of the word?
Okay. Amos's name was originally Ben, because I was thinking Uncle Ben's. I'm so sorry, but that's true. I was thinking Uncle Ben's, and as a caricature, and he kind of helped me. When I was creating Ben, who eventually became Amos, whose face I saw? I saw Clarence Thomas's face initially. But then, in order to like Amos as a character, to not hate him, because you should not hate any of your characters, I don't think, I had to see him as someone else. Otherwise, I would always hate him. When he transformed into Amos, then I started to think about the ways in which he should interact with Samuel and Isaiah, and it should not always be from a place of judgment or hatred. It should also be from a place of love, and that he should be conflicted. And that came along, I would say, maybe I was 4 years into the process of writing this novel when Amos showed up.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's incredible to hear. And I want to ask a little bit about what the whole time arc looked like. But first, I do want to talk about craft for just a moment and talk about your writing, which is, this book is so lush. Your descriptions are so vivid. I know I kind of keep using the phrase three-dimensional, but that is because everything, it seems your eyes never just like passed over something. You took the time to describe the world so fully, that it felt like something you could reach out and touch. So what is kind of your writing process? Like, what goes into building these beautiful descriptions? When you are sitting down, are you trying to get the plot down and then you go back and really think about it? Or is it something that you slowly work on?
I write from character.
Mhm.
Character for me drives everything else. Plot, structure, all of those things. I'm just trying to say to myself, like, sort of like a psychiatrist, what makes this character tick? And okay, so now this character is in the barn with this other character. What would he or she say to this character? And how would that character react to that? And where does that move them? And so now that's driving plot. And now that I have moved the plot to this point, how do I get to the next level? And now that drives structure. So it was always for me writing from the place of character. And then in terms of the language, I always remember something Toni Morrison said that James Baldwin said to her, which, can you imagine that? James Baldwin said this to Toni Morrison: the line should be as clean as a bone. So every time I was writing a sentence, I was saying to myself, what did they mean, clean as a bone? Did they mean that it should be as direct as possible? Or did they mean as like you're eating food and something tastes so good that you eat it all the way down until there's nothing left but the bone? How can I make that thing into words? And so when I would come across a description, they're in the field. Yeah, they're in the field, but what about that field? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it look like to them? When their feet rub over the rocks, does it hurt or does it comfort? When they're laughing, is it a high pitched laugh, low pitched laugh? What does it make Isaiah do on his insides? What does he see when Samuel kisses him? Is there saliva? Like, all of these things, you start thinking about that, and then I'm like, okay, translate that into clean as a bone. How do I make that clean as a bone? And so I labored over these sentences over and over. I read Toni Morrison's entire catalog backwards and forward, to understand how she does it, because Toni Morrison takes the English language and makes it something Morrisonian so that it becomes new to the reader. Like, yes, I understand that these words are English, but now I'm learning it as though English is a foreign language. So all of this is new to me and it's so beautiful. How do I do that? Like, I can't touch the hem of Toni Morrison's garment, but I tried my best to do that sort of thing, to make language new and beautiful and felt. Part of it too was I listened to a lot of music. So I went back and listened to Mahalia Jackson, who was very helpful in helping me to find the right rhythm. I listened to Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith, who were very helpful in helping me to imagine what heartbreak feels like,
Mm.
or what your loved one being pulled away on a wagon feels like. They helped me to write the blues in a way. And so all of that went into how I wrote sentence level, and how I thought about how the rhythm of this book should manifest, and how these characters should move within it.
That was just a phenomenal, like, I'm sorry. One, congrats, you pulled it off, because it's such a fantastic read. And two, just what a wonderful kind of translation of that statement, clean as a bone. Because when you started saying that, I was like, pretty juicy sentences. But then the way that you interpret that's so brilliant, and it really shows on the page. That was absolutely wonderful, Robert. So like we've been saying, 14 years, right? Obviously, we're talking about adding characters, some very important characters coming in 4 years on the line. What gave you the faith, I guess, is the question that I have here. That is a long time to work on a project. And it seems like it's a project that changed a lot. So what gave you the faith?
You know something, Isaac, I was afraid of this book. I was not confident in my ability to write it. I stopped several times because I thought no one's going to want to read this. This is preposterous. Um, but, and I'm attributing this to my blood ancestors. I kept feeling deeply shamed and guilty for not pursuing. Whenever I decided, forget it, I'm not doing it, I felt tremendous guilt, almost as though something in my gut, something in my spirit was saying, we trusted you to tell this story for us, we who have actually went through it, and you are afraid to tell it. And we sacrificed so that you could be here to tell it. How dare you? And so I would come back, write a sentence, and say, okay, that's all I can do today. I'm done. Or I would have a dream where I wrote down something, or I would wake up in the middle of the night at the witching hour and say, I have to write this down because they would be ashamed of me if I didn't. They, the ancestors. Also, pretty interestingly enough, something that propelled me was a naysayer that I met in my MFA program who accused me of being, he said, you're in danger of becoming a Black writer, because he felt like I was writing about race, and race has no place in real literature. And I didn't have the language then to tell him, sir, you are also writing about race. You just think of your race as the default one. So you just think of yourself as a human being, but you are a white human being writing about race. You just don't acknowledge it as such. But that comment sort of, along with the ancestors, made me feel guilty if I allowed myself to stop. I thought that people like him would then be right, that I am, that there's something wrong with being a Black writer, which I don't think there is at all. I proudly wear that label, Black writer. And also, he could not diminish the story that needed to be told, and this story needed to be told because I had not seen it before. So I willed myself through it, riding on the subway on the way to work, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, writing on paper bags in the supermarket, until such time that I thought it was at a stage where someone else could look at it and tell me if it was worth something or worth nothing.
And who'd you say? No, I need to. You can't stop there. You can't stop there. Who'd you send it to?
The first person who ever saw a finished draft was my husband, Adrian, who is an attorney and a Virgo. And if anybody knows anything about astrology, Virgos are the most critical of all the zodiac signs. So he was the best person to show it to because he was unabashed in his criticism. He did not say what he liked about it. He only told me what he did not like and pointed out those things. So then I revised it based on that criticism. And then I showed it to a really good friend of mine who I went to grad school with, named Osvaldo Oyola, who was an adjunct professor at NYU. And I said, Osvaldo, I don't know if this is worth the paper it's written on, but I know that you would tell me, please read this and give me your harshest criticism. Don't hold back. And he read it and he loved it. And he had, of course, criticisms, but he goes, you have something here that I have never seen before. Please keep pursuing this. And that gave me the courage to revise again and then eventually show it to PJ Mark, who is my literary agent, who um, I'm very thankful to him. He said, Robert, I fucking love this book.
That's the response one wants from one's agent. Kudos to you and your husband, though, for still being married after the harsh criticisms. There it is. A follow-up question, just real quick from here in the audience. And again, if you're in the audience, you want to ask a question, you just sign into Twitch. You can do it there. But a follow-up question, just because we're on this topic. 14-year journey, one's voice changes over time. You did just touch on a little bit about your revision process. But is this something akin to, like, you know, the Argonauts, where you started building that ship 14 years ago and the novel we hold now is almost entirely different? Or were there some through lines that stayed the same?
I'm going to show you guys something. You have an exclusive here.
Oh, here we go.
Okay. So you see that pile of paper right there? That's every iteration of the prophets over the 14 years, that stack of white paper. I rewrote this book so many times over 14 years that, and I have the original, the very first draft that I wrote in 2006. I have it. Utterly different. They're not two words that are the same from that first draft to what you have in your hand as the finished book. And yes, it was just the process of revision that the more I revised, the more I realized, oh no, that's not right. I have to write this whole chapter over because this doesn't make any sense whatsoever for this character. For example, Paul's chapter that you see in the book is absolutely nothing like Paul's initial chapters that I had been writing for like 12 years. So it is a completely new document. And I think I could not have gotten that book like this had I not wrote all of those other versions of it first. So yes, it has been a long and grueling, but also rewarding process.
I mean, again, incredibly rewarding, not just, you know, remember where we started today, but just the announcement that you debut on the New York Times bestsellers list. Also, again, this is, a lot of praise has been heaped on this book, but one of the things I'd also call it, it's also a literary page turner. It really moves and it really keeps the reader engaged. And I feel like that is the payment for all of those pages that you just showed us. So thank you for that. We also got one question here from the audience that you were mentioning that you if you were to write a prequel, as it were, basically, that it would be from one of your characters who was a woman. And they basically, and there's many, you have so many, that some of my favorite characters in this book is, and basically, did you find it challenging, they're asking, to write from a woman's point of view?
Not at all, because any writer worth their salt realizes that they're writing about human beings, irrespective of how different that human being is from them. And they will do their research to understand what are the challenges somebody walking in that identity faces. What are their concerns? What are their loves? What are their hates? What are their dislikes? You know, you just, you do that and then you observe people. I'm a big time people watcher. I have the benefit of having a great deal of Black women in my family who I have grown up with. I knew my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mother. I knew my great aunts, my great great aunts. I have, I am one of, on my father's side, I am one of 36 first cousins. most of whom are women and girls. Um, I read Black women almost exclusively, their works. Um, I am surrounded by a community and a culture of Black women. Um, I worshiped in church as a child with Black women. I jumped double dutch as a kid with Black women, or Black girls. So uh, the experience of Black women is not something that is uh, far or detached from my own experience as a human being. Also, what's lovely is engaging with Black women online under Son of Baldwin, learning so much at the feet of a lot of these Black women scholars and other writers who are Black women. You get such a bevy of information that's usable in terms of crafting um, characters who are of a different identity than yours. So it was not hard at all. It was a joy. It was just me, just like being amazed and wowed by how these characters were revealing themselves to me on the page.
And the women in this book are incredible. You did, I mean, it's like, it's funny to hear you describe that experience, because you are also in a way describing Samuel and Isaiah. They are very much surrounded by women, as it were. The last kind of question, or the last couple of questions, it's kind of a two-parter that I have for you, but just to start with the first part, you know, you've talked about how you set out to write this book because you hadn't seen a story like this told before. But obviously, from your education and your reading, there's a lot of work out there that inspired you. So I'm gonna add. I know. There's a want to be humble in this moment always. But what books do you see the prophets in conversation with?
That is a great question. I see the prophets in conversation with Toni Morrison's Beloved. I see it in conversation with James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. I see it in conversation with a more recent book that I am reading now, and I the only reason why I haven't finished is because I'm on tour now, but I think it's in conversation with The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philyaw.
Mm.
I think it's in conversation with Alice Walker's The Color Purple. And all of those books, every single one of them, if I had not read them, I could not have written The Prophets. I have a list of 10 books that if I had not read those books, I could not have the courage or the skill or the anything to have even engaged in the work that went into The Prophets. Also, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe is another book that I think the book is in conversation with to a certain extent. A book called Flesh and the Devil by Kola Booth is another book, which was very helpful in understanding African points of view. So yeah, I think there are quite a few. Also, Long Division by Kiese Layman.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he gave me a really good sense of Black childhood and the whimsy that's often denied Black children. He helped me to understand it and infuse it into the work. So those are just a few that I can think of off the top of my head.
Oh, absolutely. And then I guess, and again, asking you to set humility aside just for a moment. You again, you touched on it, but the reason you wrote this book is because you couldn't find that story out there. So what gaps in the literary canon are you hoping that the prophets fills?
You know, while I was writing The Prophets, when I initially started writing it, I could not find anything about Blackness and queerness prior to the Harlem Renaissance. Now, however, or during the time that I was writing this book, there are now works that are broaching that subject. There is a play by Danye R. Love called Sugar in Our Wounds, which is about two enslaved men in love during antebellum slavery. And then there is the remarkable Marlon James, who wrote Black Leopard, Red Wolf, where he's talking about the untold queerness in ancient Africa. So I feel like, my first instinct was, oh gosh, now there's no point in me writing this book because these other people are already broaching the subject, but I still felt like I had a story to tell. And the way that I realized that I should look at it is now I'm part of a community that includes Marlon James and Danye Love. So I feel sort of supported, because when I was first writing this book, when I mentioned to a few people what it was about, they were like, that doesn't make any sense because there were no Black queer people during slavery. And that idea that there weren't any Black queer people during slavery is so bizarre. Maybe they didn't call it queerness because that word hadn't been invented yet, but certainly there were people who were of the same gender or same sex that were in love. It's very heterosexist to think of the past in that way. And so what gap I'm hoping the prophets fills in is just that it pushes that heterosexist gaze aside to say, this is so cliche. We're here, we're queer, get used to it.
No, I think that is absolutely perfect. We've got one last one from the audience, and as always, maybe the best question comes from an audience member, and this will be the last question of the evening. Sally asks, curious if you're still hearing the voices, the whispers, still, hearing from your ancestors since you finished writing the book.
In strange ways, my dreams, when I dream of the elder people in my family, I'm always in this world that's an amalgam of so many different places that I've lived or even places that I've never been. So I'll be in a familiar room, but it won't be a familiar house, and it won't be a familiar neighborhood, but there'll be things that I recognize in the neighborhood. So whenever I dream of, say, my grandfather who passed away in 2013 at the age of 96, when I dream of him, we're always in his house. We're always in the basement of his house, which looks like a decrepit horror movie cellar. And it always has additional rooms that it didn't have, or that I don't recall it having. And I'm always trying to figure out, what are you trying to tell me? So they're no longer whispering, they're kind of screaming. But I want to know what they're trying to tell me. And I also wonder if they're proud of me, if they are okay with me having written this book, which I dedicated to several of my ancestors who have just recently or not so recently passed on. So in a way, I do still hear their voices, maybe in not the same way. And that's maybe because I already told the story. And now there's the next story to be told. And it is taking place in a time period where ancestors don't dwell, because the people who I'm writing in the 80s now. And so all of those people are still alive. So I could actually go back to where my mother currently lives to talk to some of the people I grew up with, to ask them questions when I have questions about what I'm going to write in this novel, in this new novel.
All right. Well, let me tell you, it's hard for me to imagine that they're not proud. I'm just going to do the hand clap thing one last time. Everybody, if you're in a house, feel free to clap. Absolutely fantastic. It's Robert Jones Jr. It's the Prophets, and Julie's back here with us to tell us a little bit more. But Robert, thank you so much.
Thank you, Isaac. You're the best.
Thank you.
Isaac and Robert, thank you so much. I was riveting. There's so many. The clean chicken, or the clean to the bone. That's just gonna stick with me because that was just a money statement. It just brought it all together. So thank you so much. We have a few signed first editions left. Of course, all of our club members around the world have gotten theirs. We sent them out right on the 4th, right when the street date hit. And thank you so much for an amazing evening. This is recorded and will be archived, so feel free to share with your friends. And thank you for blessing us with your presence and with your work, with your beautiful work.
so much for having me, Julie, Book Passage, everyone, Zach. Thank you so much.